Good afternoon, and welcome to the Chesapeake Foodshed Network's Coffee Talk series, Learning and Connecting for Action. My name is Yona Sipos, and I'm the Program Director for the Chesapeake Foodshed Network, or the CFN, which is coordinated by Local Concepts, a consulting firm providing the development and backbone support for the CFN. I am joined today by another of the Local Concepts team members, Hannah Gross, who is the Outreach Coordinator for the network. Before jumping into the coffee talk, I will provide a very brief overview of the CFN. The Chesapeake Foodshed Network is a group of organizations, businesses, funders, agencies, and other change agents working across the Chesapeake watershed to build a stronger and more resilient food system. We are a relatively new initiative, about 1.5 years in the making. The leadership group that spurred the network's development did so because they recognized that a great deal of extraordinary work was being done to advance our regional food system, but there was no entity intentionally trying to build connections, trust, and relationships among those out there doing the work. The mission of the CFN, therefore, is to catalyze connections and collaborations that help build a sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and equitable regional food system in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We believe that by catalyzing connections and collaborations, we are stronger together such that we can help to accelerate change in our food system. We encourage conversation and connection in various ways, including via social media. Please note the usernames and hashtags on the slide footers. We would love to see your tweets. And it was also pointed out to me that you can also use hashtag farm2institution with the number 2. So here's a picture of our network building blocks. The foundation of our network is all about building connections, getting to know one another, sharing information and knowledge, building relationships and trust, with the thought that as we know one another better, we might, over time, see opportunities to align and work collectively toward action. We invite anyone who supports our vision of a sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and equitable regional food system to participate in the Chesapeake Foodshed Network. The Coffee Talks are a platform that the network developed to help catalyze connections around specific food system topics. We partner with resource experts who provide a quick learning opportunity through their webinar presentation. Then during the webinar and in the follow-up materials, we identify ways for people to continue to engage and dig in deeper around that particular topic. Today's Coffee Talk is an opportunity for all of us to learn more about regional farm to institution and the assessment conducted by the FoodWorks group. We are delighted that at last count, 77 people across the US had registered for the Coffee Talk. The presenters today will be Sharon Feuer Gruber and Wendy Stuart, both co-founders of the FoodWorks group. They are joined today by Jamie Moore, Director, Sourcing and Sustainability of Eaton Park Hospitality Group. And the presenters will be introduced further in just a moment, but first I'll just note a few housekeeping items. If you have questions or comments during the webinar, we invite you to type them into the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Hannah will be collecting your questions and will share them with the presenters following their presentation. And within a few days of the webinar or early next week, we'll share a recording of the presentation, any additional Q&A, and a post-webinar survey, which we would be very grateful if you would fill in with your feedback and insights. So with that, I will begin with a note from Gina Navarro, who is going to introduce the presenters and provide context for their research. So let me just move us ahead to the title slide. And Gina is the program manager for Chesapeake Food and Community Health, or formerly Maryland Hospitals for a Healthy Environment, MDH2E, a grant-funded initiative housed within the University of Maryland School of Medicine's Center for Integrative Medicine. Her major responsibilities focus on engaging hospitals and healthcare providers in becoming leaders in all aspects of environmental sustainability to promote positive impacts on community health. So Gina sent apologies for not being able to jump on the webinar, as she is currently at her daughter's freshman orientation in Richmond, Virginia, and unfortunately was not able to secure a quiet location to introduce our guest presenters. But I'll now read Gina's talking points by way of their introduction. First, Gina wanted to share a brief history of the Chesapeake Food Leadership Council, also known as the CFLC, before introducing our three presenters and getting into the presentation. In 2007, the University of Maryland's initiative, known as Maryland Hospitals for a Healthy Environment, received a 2-year USDA Federal State Marketing Improvement Program grant to support a local foods to local hospital project. The project focused on engaging hospital food service professionals in purchasing local veggies, fruit, and sustainably produced meat and poultry. The project also supported the development of a Food Leadership Council to bring food service professionals together from hospitals to share and learn strategies and best practices for purchasing local foods. This council created an opportunity to leverage the work being done in healthcare to move local purchasing forward in other food purchasing sectors, including hospitality, entertainment, university, and school sectors. In 2010, with support from the Town Creek Foundation, the Food Council grew into the Chesapeake Food Leadership Council project to support and engage regional participation. They invited farmers, distributors, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, interested groups, and individuals to network and share strategic purchasing solutions, advocate for policies that support healthier local food for institutions and the communities they serve. We know that local food procurement has grown greatly in the past few years. There are a number of resources and toolkits available. A quick Google search and you can find numerous studies on the economic, food system, and public health benefits of purchasing local food. There have been many surveys and questionnaires distributed to gather local food purchasing information, and yet nearly all large institutions struggle to purchase and track local and sustainably grown food. The CFLC reached out to FoodWorks Group, a Washington, D.C. based consulting practice that advises on the development and operation of projects and organizations across the food system, to conduct a regional farm to institution stakeholder needs assessment. Our hope for this assessment was to identify barriers from a food system perspective, and more importantly, to offer the CFLC an understanding of these barriers and pinpoint priorities that the Council could support to advance institutional procurement of local and regional food. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce you to the co-founders of FoodWorks Group, Sharon Feuer Gruber and Wendy Stuart. Sharon specializes in community food security, sustainable foods, and food-related economic development on both a local and national level, with a strong emphasis on a systems-based approach. Sharon also serves as a member of the Montgomery County Food Council. Wendy provides comprehensive long-term solutions for sustainable food, agricultural, and environmental issues. Her food systems and economics expertise uniquely positions her to support nonprofit organizations and for-profit businesses as they seek to advance their vision and maintain financial sustainability. Sharon and Wendy also co-founded the Wide Net Project, a nonprofit organization that helps restore the Chesapeake Bay while concurrently supporting hunger relief. We also have Jamie Moore, Director of Sourcing and Sustainability for Eaton Park Hospitality Group. Jamie joined Eaton Park Hospitality Group in 2000 as Manager of Purchasing for their on-site brand division. He developed a local purchasing program called Farm Source, which ensures that 20% of all sites' food supply is purchased in and around their communities. The Farm Source program is recognized in the contract food business as being one of the best executed local purchasing programs. Jamie has also been involved in numerous organizations and projects over the course of his impressive career, from working directly with on-site clients to composting food waste and starting on-site gardens, to being the on-air TV spokesperson for Eaton Park Restaurant and the vice chair of PASA, or the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Ag. Welcome, Jamie, Sharon, and Wendy. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with us today. A reminder that there will be a Q&A opportunity at the end of the presentation, and please put your questions in the question box. And I'm sorry, Gina also wanted to mention that the Chesapeake Food Leadership Council project concluded this past May at the University of Maryland, with the hope that the CFLC Regional Farm to Institution Stakeholder Needs Assessment provides insight, which ultimately leads to funding opportunities to support the proposed regional priorities outlined in the assessment. Resources and contacts will be made available through the CFN in the follow-up materials. Wendy, Sharon, and Jamie, please take it away.
Thank you, Yona. It's a pleasure to be here, be a part of the Coffee Talk series and the Chesapeake Foodshed Network, and this is Sharon speaking. First, we're going to do a few polls. We'd love to get a better sense of who's joined us today, and if you're in front of a computer, you'll be able to answer them. If you're on the phone only, just bear with us for a moment, please. Jonas, do you want to put up the polls? Thank you. So as an interested party in farm to institution, what best describes you? You can just click on your answer. We should all be able to see the results.
Yeah, we'll just give it a couple more seconds here.
Interesting. So more than 2/3 as nonprofit professionals, and next would be institutions, and then representing distributors or group purchasing organizations. Thank you. Next, we'd love to know where you're calling from, who's in the Chesapeake Bay Foodshed and who is outside the Foodshed. Okay. So 2/3, 1/3 split. Good to have an understanding of that. Thank you. And then finally, we'd like to understand what best describes you in terms of your level of engagement currently in farm to institutions, whether this region or outside of this region. Mm-hmm. Okay, almost equal. Great to see, thank you. Wendy?
Thank you, Sharon. Let's start by discussing what we mean by farm to institution. When we talk about institutions, we mean for-profit, nonprofit, and government entities. Examples include colleges and universities, hospitals, senior living facilities, prisons, and K-12 schools, among others. When we say farm to institution, we mean locally or regionally produced food that is distributed to an institution either directly from farms or through brokers. It's often a collaborative effort across the supply chain that makes this possible. Products include raw ingredients that are farmed, animal proteins, local seafood, and value-added items.
And in terms of why institutions matter, institutions have great capacity for moving the needle with locally and regionally produced foods. As you know, they often serve as anchors in the community and can be leaders to which other local organizations look for guidance. They also happen to purchase a high volume of goods. To put that into context for this region, according to Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, there are 1,530 K-12 schools, universities, and hospitals in the state of Maryland alone, and they serve meals to more than 1 million adults and children every year. So 43% of these 1,530 institutions are estimated to purchase some of their food directly from what they define as a local farmer, local being a subjective term in this case. And if those 43% just spent 3% of their budget on local food, then almost $9 million would be returned to the local economy. I'm sorry, I misspoke for a second there. If all of the institutions spent just 3%, then about $9 million would be returned to the local economy. Increasingly, we've seen institutions looking to reach the goal of 20%, though, regarding local food purchasing. And so for Maryland institutions alone, a commitment to 20% local procurement would mean almost $58 million returning to the local economy. Pretty staggering numbers. In addition to economic development, an increase in local and regional food sales would also mean significant headway in the region with regard to social justice, public health, and environmental conservation. Foodworks Group's goal for our engagement with the Chesapeake Food Leadership Council was to gain a deeper understanding of what is and is not working across the value chain, what our recommendations for the CFLC would be to pursue, and in this case, since the CFLC is evolving as an organization, we're generally referring to allied organizations as well. And then also, how could demand for regionally produced foods grow and be met with needed supply? Slide change, please, Jonas.
Now, I'll give you a brief overview of the methodology we used for this needs assessment. First, we selected participants based on a list of core slots that are essential to assess the supply chain in the Chesapeake Bay Foodshed. This list included, for example, processors and distributors who specialize in animal production or local seafood. We also considered geographic diversity in our selection. We then conducted a review of the literature available from across the region and the country. Next, we conducted 27 60-minute interviews from across the supply chain and followed up over phone or email as necessary. And during the interview process, we tracked recurrent themes, notable needs, and insights that we hadn't heard elsewhere. Based on these interviews, FoodWorks Group developed a list of recommendations to help guide the CFLC in defining strategies to meet its goals. We are now going to dig into a few of the recommendations that are most relevant for the audience on this webinar. Slide change, please.
Stakeholders across the value chain identified that more robust networking and education is needed. This is interesting to us because there certainly are very effective efforts already underway in this Foodshed, but we believe that additional investment in time and resources could prove to be quite meaningful. Education of buyers, for example, is key. And by buyers, we mean consumers and also professional buyers representing institutions, food service providers, distributors, etc. One food service provider whom we interviewed explained, and I quote, "Many buyers want what they perceive as the personal integrity of small producers, but they also want the price and consistency of larger agricultural operations." And this, definitely is not rocket science for this audience, but it was well said. And it's our belief that basic buyer understanding of farm operations and scale is critical to addressing this issue. Here are two related gaps in buyer education that CFLC and allied organizations address for this region. One interesting example was from a food hub operator who said that the largest knowledge gap for hubs often is actually in conventional produce training. He said that hubs often are schooled in community and local agriculture, but we also need the larger, more traditional school of knowledge to know how the language and system work and how we can interact in a beneficial way. So another example that we heard from this interview process was from a regional processor distributor who realized that he didn't have a good understanding of how the buyers wanted their animals cut and processed. And when he started packaging his responsibly raised poultry the way the bigger commercial suppliers were packaging it, sales increased tremendously. Additionally, the CFLC could be a key stakeholder in conversation around developing a regional Foodshed brand for fisheries and agriculture. Here, I'd love to hear from any of the participants about a regional food brand that to you connotes high quality and also promotes a specific geographic area. And this would be an opportunity to put your feedback in the questions area of the control of the panel. And I'll give you an example. Appalachian Grown is a logo that many on the East Coast might be familiar with. It's often displayed on farm products that are raised in either Western North Carolina or the Southern Appalachian Mountains. And it contributes to regional identity, it's regional branding. Any other examples of regional branding? So Stacia Clinton is giving the example of Farm to Institution New England, excellent. And Kim Rush Lynch is saying Maryland's best, and also Southern Maryland meat. We have an example from Mary Zale DeBoer saying Connecticut grown. Thank you. Another example that comes to mind for me is the Gulf Wild brand in the South. And that's for all domestic seafood harvested in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's a real regional approach because it involves all of the border states of the Gulf of Mexico, so Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. So a regional brand identity for the Chesapeake for the Chesapeake Foodshed would not be to the exclusion of source identification on a more local level, but rather what we're thinking about is something that would bolster the identity of the whole Foodshed as a brand, conveying the unique values and attributes of this Foodshed. And without specifically calling for a study of how a regional brand could develop, actually many of the distributors we spoke with were asking for solutions that pointed to this. A couple of examples. One protein distributor said, quote, "Getting the philosophy out there about a sustainable food chain will take more than one company. All small decisions become easier when the larger message is conveyed." And that was really interesting to me in terms of it simplifying the process on the distributor side. And then another distributor said, "There's too many agendas and ideas. We need to unify our vision and strategy." Again, this is just a recommendation to analyze the viability and cost versus benefit of a regional Foodshed brand. And we definitely note that much cooperation would be needed to get this off the ground, including among state governments. And a deeper dive into feasibility would be the first step to really looking into this.
Also, there's a need for a regional best practices guide for stakeholders who are negotiating contracts with food service providers. This guide could include strategies that have been proven to yield results while maintaining positive working relationships across the supply chain. It can include negotiation points such as a percentage of food that is sourced locally or regionally, and transparency regarding rebates. Slide change, please. Based on our recommendation, the CFLC is also exploring next steps to develop a resource toolkit for producers and distributors around farm-to-institution sales in our region. I'll give you a couple of examples of what this could include. First, chefs understand product quality and typically want to work with regionally produced product whenever possible, but they have limited discretionary budgets and ultimately need the support of the administration to grow the institution's local food programs. Producers and distributors could offer that support, but need to know how to talk with the administration to make a case for their locally and regionally produced items. These deeper institution-wide conversations will help move along progress in a more comprehensive way. Another example, one producer-distributor said, and I quote, "Most growers that are on the small side don't really know where to start as far as retail and wholesale." Now, not all producers want to transition to institutional sales, but if they do, then training for the producer would be helpful, end quote. Taking this a step further, a representative from a GPO said that she didn't think producers know what the institutional client wants, and a published online guide would be helpful.
In closing out the recommendations on networking and education, we think that it's time to take a comprehensive look at how to accelerate and scale the sales pipeline in a holistic way for regionally produced food. Producers and distributors whom we interviewed said that personal introductions to higher volume decision makers are critical, but they're not really facilitated at the level that they need. For example, one distributor shared his perspective that there are, quote, "wonderful networking opportunities with the sustainable food world, but not within larger scale." So FoodWorks Group suggests that the CFLC and allied organizations research whether organizing a regional sales expo for higher volume producers and buyers would benefit the region's efforts to grow the market for wholesale, sustainable, and regionally produced foods. Market research would definitely be needed in terms of understanding buyer interest and learning more about existing state-level buyer-seller expos, because the last thing we'd want to do is duplicate efforts. We would want such an expo to be an efficient use of resources, and also it should contribute uniquely to the food system. Slide change, please. So as the previous slides illustrate, we definitely emphasize education as a contributor to shift in farm to institution being emphasized. And there's definitely a slow cultural shift that we're seeing at institutions in terms of valuing the source of the food and how it was grown or raised over cost of food exclusively. Now, looking at education from a different angle, education and technical assistance of farmers and processors is also key, in particular as it pertains to food safety. And as you all know, aggregation is a strong focus nationally these days. There's also increasing attention being paid to light processing of local foods, so we could all enjoy peak harvest year-round in the form of value-added products. And aggregation and processing certainly are critical to make progress in the regional food system. For these efforts to succeed, though, we also need to be sure that the regional supply chain can reliably meet increasingly tough food safety standards. Jamie Moore, the Director of Sourcing and Sustainability for the Eaton Park Hospitality Group, is here to share about his experience as a leader in bringing high-quality, regionally produced foods to consumers across the food shed. Take it away, Jamie.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to give you first a little bit of an overview of Eaton Park Hospitality Group. So most of you, maybe some of you do know who we are, but others may not. But we do have a restaurant division, which we operate 69 restaurants around Pittsburgh, West Virginia, and Ohio. And they're family restaurants, pretty much probably similar to a Cracker Barrel or a Denny's. And we also operate on-site food service at colleges as well as businesses. Colleges, for instance, in the Baltimore area, we're doing Micah, and we're also doing Loyola. And within businesses, we're doing the food service for Google in Pittsburgh, Google in Chicago, PNC Bank, Highmark, and folks like that. So within our restaurant division, or within the Eaton Park Hospitality Group, we started a program called Farm Source. And Farm Source is our local purchasing program in which we strive to hit 20% of our dollars locally. Last year, within our Farm Source program, we purchased $21.7 million locally, and that represents all of the brands, the restaurants, as well as the on-site food service. In my role, I am strictly responsible for vetting and looking at who we're buying from that local, from those local dollars, and I also calculate what we're spending. Or what we're purchasing from each of these locations. So we've been tracking our purchases since 2007, and like I said, we hit $21.7 million under our Farm Source definition. And with that, there's a process that goes in play. So when one of our locations wants to purchase from a said source, it then prompts me to go out and inspect that location. So some of the things that we're doing in regards to inspection is looking at, one, understanding the process of how they're producing the food. If it's a cheese manufacturer, or if it's a yogurt manufacturer, or if it's someone that is just aggregating produce, we want to understand their process of what they're doing. We do have requirements for these vendors. In regards to growers, we're looking for them to have a food safety plan. So how are you harvesting the lettuce? Are you washing the lettuce? Are you spinning the lettuce? Any of those processes in which they're touching the product, we want to make sure that they understand that there's a area or a potential for contamination. Either it be Listeria or E. coli or whatever it may end up being. We want to make sure that they understand that and also have a remedy, maybe not, but just make sure that they have an awareness of it and a corrective action that may apply. Growers also are required to have good agricultural practices. Either right now in 2015 or 2016, I'm looking at them to have training at this point. Part of the good agricultural practices is writing a food safety plan. So first and foremost, they need to have a food safety plan in place. In regards to producers, and this is the folks that are making, the raw juice bar that might be down the street that wants to start to supply to one of our locations, or it may be the local cheese person that's making, artisan cheese, or they're making charcuterie or whatever it may end up being. We're looking for them to have a plan, or on top of that would be a HACCP plan or a preventive controls for human food. Really understanding a little bit more about how they're incorporating safety into their operations. You can go to the next slide. What I've put here is the Food Safety Modernization Act. And this is something that is encouraging, or not encouraging, but it's certainly forcing some of the larger buyers like myself to really look at food safety first, because ultimately the liability of these vendors is going to fall back down to the folks that are purchasing the product, which is us. So one of the risk management or risk assessments that we do is to make sure that the folks that we're purchasing from have some sense of food safety. So I'm going to explain a little bit about the Food Safety Modernization Act. I don't want to go in depth with this, but I do want to give you a sense of sort of what's coming about. The Food Safety Modernization Act is going to force some of the larger entities, as well as small entities. There is a timeline that comes along with this. But the larger entities are going to be forced to move by September of 2016 into having a preventive control for human food. So what is preventive control for human food? Well, the first thing that I'm just going to read a little bit from a document that I downloaded that is basically the covered facilities must establish and implement a food safety system that includes an analysis of hazards and risk-based preventive controls. The rules set requirements for a written food safety plan, which include the following pieces. They have to have a hazard analysis. This is the first step of really looking at what hazards exist in producing that food. These hazards could be unintentionally introduced or intentionally introduced. They could be someone just basically altering the final product. So looking at ways that they might have locks or keys on, or a lock on, you know, if they're working in a incubator kitchen with other restaurants or other folks, making sure that no one has access to that finished product. They also have to have preventive controls. Preventive controls, these are measured, or they're required to, let me see if I can frame this word. Basically, preventive controls are making sure that you've incorporated or not incorporated a food allergen, or you have sanitation controls in place, as well as supply chain controls, and lastly, a recall program. So preventive controls are basically in place to ensure that the hazards that are required, the hazards that are requiring a preventive control, will be minimized or prevented. So how are you going to prevent someone from going in intentionally or unintentionally altering your final product? Well, I'm going to put a lock on my cabinet of where my finished product might be. That might be a way that you have a preventive control. And then ultimately, you have corrective actions for those preventive controls. So if someone did alter that product, what did you end up doing with the final product? Well, I'm hoping that you're going to tell me that you will eliminate, you've destroyed it, and it's not going to go into our locations. I also want to touch upon corrective actions. So the corrective actions are steps taken to timely identify and correct a minor isolated problem that occurred during the food production. So corrective actions include actions to identify a problem with preventive control implementation to reduce the likelihood of the problem to occur again. So you're really looking at ways that you have something, basically your preventive controls or controls that you have in place, and then your corrective actions are, if those controls you alter those controls, how are you correcting them? And then the last piece of the Food Safety Plan, and this is all outlined for the Food Safety Modernization Act, but the last piece is the verification. Or, well, I'll even skip verification, because verification is really looking at, again, looking at ways that you're validating with scientific evidence that a preventive control is capable of effectively controlling or identifying the hazard. So basically, you're testing your corrective action. Did that in fact work is what verification is. And then the last piece is traceability. You know, I require all of our locations that we might be purchasing from to have some way to trace back that product or to recall that product if there's a problem. So if someone got sick on a block of cheese, I want to know that we have a capable way of going back to the source of the supply, and they can then in turn recall the product that may end up going out to 10 different other producers or other folks that are using that product. So I'm looking for a traceability program that they have in place at their location. Compliance dates, and I have a list of compliance dates, and I think that the easiest way to understand this is the September 15th or the September take that back, August 30th of 2016. If you are a large entity, and that is someone that has over 500 employees, they are required to have this in place. If you're under 500 employees, then you would require to do it by August 30th of 17. And then if you are an annual business below $1 million, you will be required by August 30th of 2018 to comply to this rule. So these are things that we are looking at from a food safety or a risk assessment to reduce our risk, that anyone coming new into our system, that we're requiring these now. So what I have in my last note there is FSMA, as I've got FSMA will drive decisions. And as you can see in my example, FSMA is, my landline is ringing. FSMA is driving decisions for me to make sure that our local sources, or even any type of supply that's coming into our locations, ultimately has these pieces, specifically a food safety plan in place. And that's what I've got, and I'm passing this off to, I guess this is going to go back to Sharon. Then.
It comes to me, Wendy. Thanks so much for your insights, Jamie. Really informative. Let's continue with another key recommendation addressing transportation issues. The establishment of a transportation working group could mitigate some of the logistical challenges that the region faces. So such challenges in the Chesapeake Foodshed are really complex because it's a diverse region with multiple state lines and both urban and rural environments. Also, different states have vastly different amounts of production that service the region, which raises important questions, including how to most efficiently move this product around and how to grow the economy of each individual state when product consistently crosses state borders. So these lead to an overarching question, and that is, what is the role of commercial transportation? And a working group could address these issues. Now, the trucking industry is relatively efficient, so rather than reinventing the wheel, regional food systems need to find solutions that work within the existing infrastructure. Regional organizations like the CFLC and the CFN are needed to ensure inclusion of the entire foodshed, and they can also help facilitate cooperation and outside-the-box solutions. For instance, they could support the development of tech-based solutions. I'll give you an example. One respondent that we surveyed said, and I quote, "With regard to sustainability, I'm not sure that our local food system is a net improvement over larger scale due to current inefficiencies like half-empty trucks." So backhauling and matchmaking support through technology could have a positive impact. With capital support, a transportation working group could perhaps initiate or partner on the development of a tool that looks at transportation in real time, such as a backhauling or matchmaking technology app. This solution could keep delivery costs down, which in turn would reduce the wholesale price. Sharon, did we lose you?
Hi there. I'm sorry. It was a little glitchy for a moment. Can you hear me?
No, we can.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, great. Here are a couple of other needs that could be addressed through a working group that focuses on transportation-based solutions. As you know, clearly with the expertise of the participants in this webinar, I'm sure that you know that a minimum amount of product movement is needed for it to be worth it for a producer or distributor to make a transaction. And meeting these minimums can inhibit progress for local and regional food systems. So to help build volume, buyers could band together to purchase certain products. For example, one food service provider, and I think actually this might have been Jamie who suggested this, explained that he and other large buyers could pool together to get a specific apple approved and stocked by a broadline distributor, and then buyers could combine orders. And the quote was, even if one specific university doesn't need 100 pallets, together they could order the minimum amount needed for the distributor, end quote. So in general, our opinion is that networking institutions through this type of working group or otherwise means an opportunity to leverage collective power and to really affect change. Another need that a transportation working group could help address, food service providers and institutions that operate 7 days a week or even 5 days a week need delivery multiple times a week, but many farmers can only deliver once a week. Food hubs certainly have a role in addressing this, but when that's not a possibility for one reason or another, on-farm aggregation or other transportation-based solutions could fill that gap. And the CFLC, the CFN, and other organizations can help determine who needs to be at the table to help address these issues, as well as take a lead role in convening such a working group. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, all the participants, and so feel free in the question box to send your ideas to the organizers, and we'll discuss them at the end, assuming you've done something. Thank you.
In terms of current efforts, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, which represents 22 regional jurisdictions in the DMV, has an existing local freight committee. They're currently looking at establishing a local food freight subcommittee. Such complementary efforts could certainly round out representation across the Foodshed. Slide change, please.
So this needs assessment has left us with some answers, and of course, many more questions, a few that stand out. We'd love to have a better understanding of what programs that are housed by government or nonprofit organizations across the Foodshed aim to keep agricultural land in production. So one learning from this assessment was that farmers' experience with regard to land access and affordability varied widely across the region. So we believe that a deeper look at policy is needed on the municipal, county, and state level, with the goals of identifying and potentially adapting best practices. Additionally, if land is more accessible in specific areas within the region, access to capital within those areas also needs to be considered. This way, once land is purchased, expensive infrastructure like irrigation and fencing, for example, can also be installed. One case study that really spoke to me is of a Virginia-based producer who shared that she's approached regularly about taking over people's land, since since the landowner would get a tax break if the land stays in agricultural use. So for her, access to land is not at all an issue, but finding people to loan her money for the infrastructure is an issue. On the flip side, a Maryland-based producer talked about not being able to find affordable land at all. So an effort by local organizations to catalog policies and their impact could lead to long-term results with regard to keeping agricultural land in production and growing the regional foods movement, including farm to institution, of course.
Another topic for further exploration, what are the sites within the region that could most benefit from infrastructure improvements? For example, producers and distributors suggested centralized chillers, as well as processing facilities for poultry and value-added products. We need to conduct research to determine where the impact of infrastructure investments would yield the most benefit. Fresh Farm Markets is one organization that's looking at the need for and impact of infrastructure across the region.
And there are many organizations that are delving more deeply into issues that are key for regional farms institutions to flourish. In addition to the Chesapeake Foodshed Network, FoodWorks Group recommends keeping an eye out for the groups listed here. There could be potential for collaboration or even adapting initiatives for this region's needs. Very briefly, yeah, stay on that slide, thank you. Very briefly, I'll just say a note about each of these organizations. Farm to Institution New England, we have much to learn from FINE and their regional approach. Their website has excellent resources, and of particular note for this webinar is their food service toolkit. They're really taking the lead on farm to institution. The Good Food Purchasing Organization is working to create culture change on an organizational level through purchasing policies. Healthcare Without Harm, their healthy food and healthcare specifically focuses on farm to institution, and they've been a partner of the CFLC over the years. Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future has been a fantastic food systems resource in Maryland and the broader region. And I was just taking particular note of the Maryland Food System Mapping Project, if you haven't investigated that yet. Menus of Change is a program of the Culinary Institute of America and Harvard School of Public Health. In particular, it's worth looking at their Principles of Healthy, Sustainable Menus. The National Farm to School Network is doing excellent work around farm to institution, both on the ground and also with advocacy, a piece not to be underemphasized. And lastly, the Northeast Center to Advance Food Safety. They are newly funded just in the last couple of months by a federal grant. And it's a multi-state, multi-university effort that includes much of the Chesapeake Bay Foodshed, with a focus on small to mid-sized producers and helping them get up to speed with FSMA. And the University of Maryland is part of this effort. Slide change, please. These are just a few links we thought you might find helpful about farm to institutions broadly and also about food safety. And Yona can share the links via chat at the end of the webinar so people can copy them if they'd like. And one link that I would say is missing here is the toolkit that I mentioned on the Farm to Institution New England website, the food service toolkit. Next slide.
All right, well, I'd like to thank Jamie Moore, Yona Sipos, and the Chesapeake Food Network. Jamie, Sharon, and I are happy to answer questions anyone might have.
Thank you so much, Wendy, Sharon, and Jamie, for a wonderfully informative presentation that I see is already raising some lots of comments throughout and some questions. We have just under 10 minutes for some of the questions. Hannah has been collecting them and will now moderate the Q&A session. And if we don't get through all the questions right now, we'll share the unanswered questions with the presenters for their review and response, which will be included in the follow-up email.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Hannah Gross. As Yona said at the beginning, I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the Chesapeake Foodshed Network. First of all, thank you so much to Wendy, Jamie, and Sharon. That was an amazing and informative webinar. So some of the questions that we have been collecting, this one is specifically for Jamie from Marydale DeBoer. So what is the farm source definition of local for Eden Park hospitality?
Sure. So farm source, we define it in 4 categories. The first category is produce. Produce is sourced within 150 miles from the location. Now, farm source doesn't dive into organic, sustainable. It's just really trying to focus on the mile radius from the location. So I want to preface that. The second category is dairy. So all of our dairy, all of our fluid dairy is sourced within 150 miles, and none of the farms will treat their herds with RBST, which is recombinant bovine somatropin, which is a growth hormone. We've eliminated that since about 2006. And then the meat category falls under a 400-mile radius from the site. That definition, we'd love to be able to get it closer under that 400-mile, but it really comes down to proximity to processors. Lack of processors is probably our biggest obstacle within that category. And then the last category is artisanal. And artisanal is measured at 150 miles as well. And that's really the local coffee roaster that is supplying us coffee at our location, or the bread maker, or the sausage maker, or the pastry, the bagel company that we might be buying from locally. It may not be, we're not grouping in the Brugger's or the national chains. It's really the local brands is what we're really focusing on. So it's 4 categories: it's produce, it's meats, it's dairy, and it's artisanal.
Great, thank you. And another question. This one is for Wendy or Sharon. Question from Stasia Clinton. What about the working groups that already exist in the region? What about ones that convene in Maryland and the one common market convenes in Philly? Are you suggesting a regional farm to institution work group, or to continue building the state or city-based work groups?
Wendy and I are not in the same place, so it's not clear. Wendy, if you want to answer, if you want me to answer, I'm fine either way.
Maybe why don't you take a first stab at it?
Sure. We were thinking specifically of a regional approach, because in this region, similar to New England and other regions around the country, the boundaries are so fluid, and it's broad. The Chesapeake Foodshed, just the boundaries of the bay itself, it's more miles than the coast of California. We were thinking more of a larger regional convening that would build on smaller city-based, state-based work groups.
Great. Anything else to add? Okay, another question, this one from Kurt Nelson. Do you have examples of investors funding conventional to organic land conversion and/or commodity to farm to institution conversion, then profit sharing with farmers to create more supply?
That is an excellent question. I don't know of any offhand, but it's something I would like to look into. Wendy, do you know of anything?
I don't know of them offhand. I agree. I know they're out there. I don't know them offhand.
But that's something we'd like to discuss with you more offline, and if you're interested, I'd like to learn more about it.
I know there are some specifically from the state of Maryland, but yeah, let's take that offline and have a longer conversation about it.
Sure. Do any of the participants have any input on that? All right. Another question for Jamie. Do you have any additional areas of need that a regional farm to institution initiative could address that would be helpful in your work?
Do I have any what? Sorry.
All right. Additional areas of need that a regional farm to institution initiative could address that would be helpful to your work.
Additional. I'm not sure if I understand the question. Additional. I'm sorry. I'm looking through the question and I don't see that one there.
Sure. It is a more recent one. It is from Louise Mitchell. Louise, do you have any clarification for that question? So what could a regional initiative support for you in your work, Jamie?
I'm not sure what type of regional support that means. I mean, we're a for-profit entity company. I'm a resource for our. I work for a for-profit company, so I'm not sure what she's meaning by resources.
Perhaps like the working groups that were discussed earlier in the webinar, or any sort of infrastructure enrichment?
Okay. Well, I mean, I find that the working groups are looking for somewhat of a direction, and I'm able to provide that. I don't know if I'm gleaming information from them, other than some of the obstacles that I'm faced with that I can maybe pitch them to maybe hopefully uncover. What I'm finding that's working well for me is really working with the foundation community, at least in the Pittsburgh region, to sort of give them a sense of what's going on. FSMA is something that is going to really have detrimental effects on the local food scene, primarily from the buyer perspective of myself and other large buyers. So almost every large grocer is moving down this direction, that they're requiring food safety plans to be in place, as well as your Sodexos, your Airmarks, your Parkhurst Dining, your other divisions of people that are buying food at large in institutions from an institutional purchasing plan. They're going to start requiring food safety plans from these smaller producers. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that the foundation community that wants to focus on local have an understanding that this is an important piece that they need to subsidize to be able to help farmers write food safety plans. So I think that what I can at least suggest or say is that if we all work together, or if there's a way that we can kickstart some of the local or the local folks that are out there that are really trying to move and produce local ingredients or local food, need to know that the larger buyers are going to start requiring this, and that it's going to be behoove of them to start their business off properly by writing a food safety plan.
I just would like to add to that, this is Sharon speaking, that the multiple buyers we spoke with, Jamie and otherwise, expressed their concern about their ability to continue working with these smaller producers who are just don't have the capacity or the understanding about the impact of FSMA, and that they might not be able to buy from them in the future. And these are really invested purchasers like Eaton Park Hospitality Group, who've really put resources toward building the capacity of these small producers. The last thing they want is to have to drop them, but because of liability issues, if they don't come along, there's a likelihood that many will not be able to do wholesale selling to food service providers and food hubs and the like. Some of these businesses are going to be doing some cost sharing so that the farmers and producers could make headway with their food safety plans, and will even in some cases cover the first successful food safety plan that's been written, but that this is something that needs real investment of depth in the by the environmental community, by the food security community in general. Just funding in general needs to be directed this way, in a big way, in our opinion.
Yeah, I do see this as being a concern that needs to be addressed from. Like I said, I'm really focusing on not the for-profit, but the foundation community is who I'm really addressing.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and say thank you so much for fielding those questions. And I know we have a few more that we'll be sharing with the presenters and sending out when we send out the follow-up email after the webinar. I've just moved us on for the sake of time. I'm sorry to cut everybody off, but to some next steps, just a reminder about the links that were posted and are also posted in the chat box so you can copy them easily. An encouragement to follow FoodWorks Group on Twitter and keep an ear out for the other important work that they are conducting locally, regionally, and nationally. And to please sign up for the CFN email list to hear about upcoming farm to institution activity and other opportunities and needs.
And just a, sorry, Yona, if I could jump in. Just another note that if you are interested in learning more about food safety, especially as a group, the Chesapeake Foodshed Network's next Coffee Talk is on group gap and food safety training, and that'll be in August. You can check out our website for more information, which Yona has up right now.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That's great. And Jamie, I was going to say thank you so much for all the information that you shared about FSMA, and Lindsay Gilmore will be adding more to that in August. And then we have another Farm to Institution webinar coming up, Coffee Talk coming up in September, and some network learning opportunities. Thank you so much for your interest and for joining us. And thank you again to the presenters for sharing your research and expertise. As mentioned, we'll follow up with you next week, and we would value your input and feedback both on this Coffee Talk webinar and for the broader context of the CFN. So please do take a few minutes to fill in the survey. If you are interested in serving as a resource expert for a different Coffee Talk, please contact Christy Gabbard, the owner of Local Concepts and the CFN coordinator. Visit our website, chesapeakefoodshed.net, for more information and to register. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you can join us in the future. Thank you so much to everybody, and have a great afternoon.